Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the 11th week of 2013. For more than 20 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media. First on a so-called community radio station, and when censored and locked out of there, welcomed, I'm happy to say, by the good people at Urbana Public Television. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants are David Green and Ron Szoke. We'll take turns suggesting an item from the week's news that's been ignored or misreported, sometimes even innocently, and then asking our colleagues to comment on it. At the end, we'll have time for Coburn's Corner, where we'll nominate cliches, overused phrases, and tedious words for elimination. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who's been talking sense about American politics for more than twice the 20-some years we've been on the air. Chomsky has said that in the American media, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true, and it will sound like it's from Neptune. So we're cablecasting from Neptune on the 15th day of March, 2013. Today is the Ides of March, from the ancient Roman dating system that divided the month into Ides, Nones, and Calends, leading to actually a wonderful phrase, ad calendas Graecus, at the Greek calends. Since the Greek calendar had no calends in it, the phrase meant mañana, or never. So, at the Greek calends, there are so many things that are postponed to that. The Ides of March are known particularly to us from a 400-year-old play written by an English aristocrat who had studied classics intensely in his youth. He was perhaps responsible for the classic, the Elizabethan translation of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is attributed to his uncle, but he may well have done it himself. In his play Julius Caesar, the soothsayer was referring to today when she said, "Beware the Ides of March." And it was on this day, the Ides of March in 44 BC, that Julius Caesar was assassinated by a group of about 60 conspirators who called themselves the Liberators. They wanted to return Rome to a model republic, and they were unhappy with how Caesar had consolidated powers. One of the leaders was Marcus Brutus, whose mother had been one of Caesar's lovers, and whom Caesar helped establish in government. Et tu, Brute, was finally an edible cry, perhaps. There's a book from about 10 years ago by the political writer Michael Parenti on the assassination of Julius Caesar with the subtitle of People's History of Ancient Rome, in which he does an interesting job of putting the story of Julius Caesar, which has reverberated through our literature since at least Shakespeare's time, into a political context with all sorts of modern wise saws and modern instances, if you like. It's been a week for the making and perhaps unmaking of states and governments. New leaders in the world's largest state by population, and that is the new president of China, and the world's smallest state by population, that is Vatican City. Both states have reference to other social formations, we might say, the Middle Kingdom and the Kingdom of God. In regard to China, the new Chinese president, Xi Jinping, took a tour, or a quite remarkable tour, a few years ago of Latin America, visiting Mexico, Jamaica, Colombia, Venezuela, and Brazil, to promote Chinese ties in the region and to boost the country's reputation in the wake of the global financial crisis. This was in the summer of 2009. In that year, when visiting Mexico, Xi spoke in front of a group of overseas Chinese and explained China's contribution to the financial crisis, saying it was, quote, the greatest contribution towards the whole human race made by China to protect its 1.3 billion people from hunger. He followed with a rather direct accusation for foreigners, guess who he meant, trying to interfere in Chinese affairs. In Chinese, speaking of Mexico, he remarked, "There are some bored foreigners with full stomachs who have nothing better to do than point fingers at us," that is China. First, China doesn't export revolution. Second, China doesn't export hunger and poverty. And third, China doesn't come and cause you headaches. What more is there to be said? He said, speaking, as I say, in Mexico. The story was reported only locally in Mexico at first. The implicit criticism of China's great rival in the world. There were immense discussions in China, internet forums and so forth, and the actual video of the comments came out because it was a Hong Kong television station that was following Xi around and broadcast a matter on Hong Kong TV, not first and then around the world. Xi continues to travel around the world, or has continued to travel around the world before becoming president of China this week. Belgium, Germany, Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, Japan, South Korea, Cambodia, and Myanmar. This is particularly important given the American notion that it's a rivalry with China that drives American foreign policy and indeed economic policy these days. She also visited the U.S., Ireland, and Turkey in February of 2012. The visit included meeting with President Obama and Vice President Biden, whom he had met extensively in China before, and stops in California and Iowa, where he met with the family that had hosted him during his 1985 tour as a provincial official. Also this week, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, was elected Bishop of Rome as Pope Francis. A member of the Society of Jesus, which is sometimes wrongly called an order of priests, that's not quite correct, and of the Catholic political movement Comunione Liberazione, Bergoglio has been what had been a Jesuit superior in Argentina during the Dirty War, the U.S.-inspired torture and murder in the late 70s and early 80s, like Pinochet's reign in Chile. Yesterday, The Guardian in the UK, where one really has to go these days to find much about world politics and indeed about American politics, The Guardian withdrew its most serious charge of collaboration with the Argentinian dictatorship by Bergoglio, contained in a column by one Hugh O'Shaughnessy in 2011. The Guardian wrote, quote, "This article was amended on 14 March 2013. The original article, published in 2011, wrongly suggested that Argentinian journalist Horacio Verbitsky claimed that Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio connived with the Argentinian Navy to hide political prisoners on an island called El Silencio during an inspection by human rights monitors. Although Verbitsky makes other allegations about Bergoglio's complicity in human rights abuses, he does not make this claim. The original article also wrongly described El Silencio as Bergoglio's holiday home. This has been corrected." Close quote. So The Guardian, which is the source of much of the discussion in the American press and elsewhere about Bergoglio's, Pope Francis's involvement with the junta in Argentina, has withdrawn a good part of it. In a statement to the Latin American bishops in 2007, the new pope, not yet pope of course, said, "We live in the most unequal part of the world, which has grown the most, yet reduced misery the least. The unjust distribution of goods persists, creating a situation of social sin that cries out to heaven and limits the possibilities of a fuller life for so many of our brothers." Close quote. Much has been made of the fact that this new pope is from the global south. Meanwhile, the leader of the state responsible for the most violence and disorder in the world was preparing to visit its chief client this week. President Obama continued to threaten Iran, a major oil-producing state not under U.S. control, as states that he thought were under U.S. control, notably Afghanistan and Pakistan, moved out. Pakistan held a news conference this week to trumpet its agreement with Iran to import Iranian gas. The U.S. said this would violate the Iranian sanctions. Really? Said the Pakistanis. House Republicans emerged from a rare meeting with Obama on Wednesday afternoon, saying he assured them he was serious about cutting programs like Social Security and Medicare. So with those doings of our maximum leaders this week, we'll turn to Ron Szoke, who's here to meet with you.
Yes. Well, I shall say some sooths and make perhaps 4 or 5 points briefly and ask my learned colleagues here to respond. Connecting with what I ended with last time, the envy charge against those of us who are concerned about inequality and extreme inequality and its consequences for our society, which I think are almost wholly destructive. The online newsletter from the Too Much people, what are they called?
Yeah.
The Institute for Policy Studies.
Right.
Yeah. It begins this way. Their newsletter is subtitled An Online Weekly on Excess and Inequality. Those of us who pound away at the keyboard about how unequal our world has become have grown accustomed to one particular line of attack. You envy the attack goes. The super rich, you blast them because you can't be them. So this is a completely absurd and vicious charge. It's beneath contempt, really, but apparently it's plausible to a whole lot of people, especially if they themselves are envious of the big rich and all of their goodies and privileges and gadgets and their yachts and whatever. Another casualty of the cultural sector, this claims, is the toll that high levels of inequality exact from society. We know that the poor don't live as long. Typically, in the lowest fifth of society, 5 years less on average than the wealthier people. So it's a threat to the lives of a lot of people. But this says that 2 Polish sociologists have published new research that compares levels of cultural activity across 22 European nations. In more equal societies, the 2 researchers note in the International Sociology Journal, people attend more theatrical performances, visit more art museums, and read more books. What's shoving time for culture aside from more unequal nations? Wider income gaps, they suspect, raise the profile of high-status material goods and shift people's focus onto work-related activities that can help them afford these high-status goods at the expense of less visible cultural activities. So if they can keep you pining for a 12-cylinder $1 million car, that may tend to shift your efforts and focus away from what I would consider more worthy activities. The next section is called Petulant Plutocrat of the Week. The CEO of energy giant Transocean had it all figured out back in 2008. The newly elected President Obama, Stephen Newman, felt sure, but heavily hiked taxes on firms like his. So right after the election, Newman moved his headquarters from Houston to all the way to Switzerland, a nation that knew how to keep CEOs happy for a long time. The Swiss were really proud of their reputation, especially for banking secrecy and keeping the enormous wealth of foreigners in their numbered accounts completely secret from tax people and other inquirers. Newman would go on to pocket $9.9 million in 2011, when good times appeared eternal until this March 4th, when Swiss voters approved the world's tightest CEO pay law. Newman can now forget about merger bonuses and golden parachutes. The new Swiss law bans them. Still upcoming, another Swiss referendum that would limit CEO take-home to 12 times the pay of a firm's lowest paid worker. And indeed, there is an American CEO who has joined into this, an amazing person, Craig Jelinek, who is the top exec at Costco. He is working with Business for a Fair Minimum Wage, an advocacy group that last week applauded a new legislative initiative in Congress that would hike the current $7.25 an hour minimum to $10.10. What might get more CEOs behind a higher minimum wage? One suggestion surfaced last week in the American Prospect: create a new federal income tax bracket for income over 25 or 50 times the minimum wage, with the tax rate on that income well above the current top 39.6% federal rate. So this has long seemed like a very reasonable measure to me, is to fix the rate at of the top executives, the maximum at some fixed multiple of what the average worker receives. It's jumped in the past 50 or 60 years from 50 or 60 times to 10 times that, sometimes given in the 300 to 500 times wage. And some people are getting upset that these top executives make more in one day than ordinary workers make in 1 year. So leaving that, how does this possible? How does this come about? Headline: New York Times, U.S. companies stash more cash abroad. Tax the likely factor in the report. So this tells us that Apple Incorporated, Microsoft, Pfizer, and other U.S. multinational corporations boosted cash held offshore in 2012, likely in an effort to flee U.S. taxes, said a report released on Tuesday. So we have no direct access to what the real motivation was for this, but many people find it. This is the only plausible explanation of what they were doing. They were trying to hide this cash from American taxmen. So it is not always clear, they say, why companies keep cash abroad. A related study suggested tax was a factor. A startling number of them, quoting, admit they have paid little or no taxes on this income, which is a pretty good indicator that these profits are sitting in low tax or offshore havens, and they need not pay a tax on this until it is repatriated, brought into this country, even though they are allowed to shift it around abroad and delay paying taxes on it indefinitely. This could go on in principle forever. The United States has a worldwide corporate tax regime that taxes income without regard to where it is earned, but profits are typically not taxed until companies bring them into the country, so many companies keep them abroad indefinitely. So what this has led to is, where do we get the money to run the government? And we have a new proposal before us, Mr. Ryan's 10-year budget plan, which is widely considered by liberal leftist economists and commentators as completely absurd. It doesn't add up. It's a complete joke, according to some. But again, we'll be told that because it cuts spending, except for military spending, apparently, that it should be taken serious. That Representative Ryan is the only serious budget commentator that we have. Next point: exclusive Obama administration to let spy agencies scour America's finances. So this says that for the first time, American spy agencies and domestic police agencies will be given unrestricted access to a number of very large databases, the big data thing that may enable them to spot some lawbreakers and maybe even terrorists So who could be against that? Final point, the Securities and Exchange Commission has accused the state of Illinois of securities fraud. For the second time in history, federal regulators accused an American state of securities fraud on Monday, ordering Illinois to stop misleading investors about the condition of its public pension system. So the SEC has announced that they are reaching a settlement with the state of Illinois on this, but you'll undoubtedly be hearing a lot more about this. You've been hearing, of course, a good deal. Especially if you're employed by a public agency such as the University of Illinois or a public school system in the near future. So be aware, be on the lookout for bandits holding subpoenas.
Thank you, Ron. Got a take on Ron's Sooth, David?
Well, on the 15th or 16th of every month, when some university employees get paid, and we look in some like myself, would like to assure ourselves by looking in our bank statement to see that the money has been deposited, and it continues to be. Today was another day in which I and many other people got paid. So I'm not quite sure how that happens amidst all these budgetary, this stuff, but it just seems to be so. It hasn't gotten that far yet, although this has been a week where our brothers and sisters at the SCIU have been on strike for the first 3 days of this week in an attempt to gain a few more dollars from a rather stingy university administration.
But are you stashing more cash in Bermuda or the Cayman Islands?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure what TIA is doing with my cash, but
some question.
Yeah. But I guess what some of your comments, Ron, just sort of provoked me to think about why have we been on a 40-hour work week for such a long time? Yeah. I mean, when did we go on the 40-hour work week? The 1930s, the 1950s? Productivity has gained markedly since then.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Why are people still going to work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day? Obviously there's a lot of variability in this, but why hasn't there been a movement by labor or otherwise, beyond the minimum wage, which needs to be increased, of course, but to go to a 4-day work week? It's being done in other countries, in Europe, and everything about economic productivity and the environment would call for that. And I would say the main opposition to that is based, beyond just the idea that people would want to be paid more for doing less work. Would want to be paid the same, let's say, for doing 4 days a week rather than 5 days a week. The idea that you would tighten up the labor market by having to hire more people and therefore put pressure on wages and sort of tip the balance in terms of worker demand or the demand for labor, or in terms of to the advantage of workers and their bargaining is one of the things. But I find it strange. I'm sure some people talk about this, but there hasn't been any movement. The focus is all on minimum wage. So that would be one comment in response to one practical comment.
Well, some have advocated, like Nancy Pelosi and Obama himself, raising the minimum wage. And this immediately, of course, gets a response from the right that this will cause a great deal of unemployment. Others pointing out that that's false and provably false. But anyway.
Yeah, one of the most shocking graphs about the economy over the last generation, of course, is the matching of the curves for productivity and take-home pay. Productivity, as David suggests, moves up. Take-home pay wages, essentially take-home pay for most Americans, have been essentially flat since the 1970s. Neoliberalism has won on this most basic level. And the shocking thing is that various suggestions about work sharing and so forth, that is reduced hours of work, as you suggest, David, particularly as it's been instituted in Europe, in order to increase the number of people employed. this work sharing may have a perverse version in the United States where companies reduce the number of hours per week of employees in order not to have to pay for health insurance for them under Obamacare. I mean, there is a move towards part-time employment, not exactly a 4-day week, but like that for many American workers right now, and they realize that the result is not only a lessening in their total pay packet, but also a lessening in the employer's responsibility under Obamacare. So, we may be getting there for perverse reasons, eh?
Yeah. One thing Germany did during the economic downturn in 2009 was it provided incentive for employers to not lay people off by subsidizing a move to a shorter work week, and meaning that instead of laying people off, people would in a kind of a job sharing approach, and these kind of practical approaches. I mean, it isn't that Germany is so virtuous. It isn't they're not a part of. It isn't that they're not central to the neoliberal austerity regime in Europe at this time. But there's this lingering, I don't know what it is about German culture, there's this lingering concern that sort of an economic collectivity that just as Ron began by referring to economic inequality and the general bad effects of that in all kinds of ways, health and so forth, that Germany seems to have some consciousness that it's good for society when people who want to work are working. Beyond that, I would add that I would think that one of the disincentives to a 3-day work week in this country is that it would give people more leisure time to, among other things, perhaps participate in government, participate in civic activities of various kinds. I may be optimistic in saying that. I'm sure that the entertainment industry and the sports leagues and so forth would be happy to stretch their intensive viewing beyond the usual 2-day weekend. Not that it already hasn't been, but it would at least provide an opening for people to have a little more time to do some of the things. I think there would have to be a general movement. I mean, there would have to be many other things go on before people would more begin to use their leisure time to participate in meaningful democratic civic activities. But that I think that is something that would concern the ruling class beyond just the economic and monetary aspects of it.
You think those who control wealth and power might really be upset if folks who didn't have to be at the job or someplace else all the time and actually could get together and talk about how the society should be working and how it isn't? I mean, that might disturb some people.
Yes. Yeah, I think we need a new philosophy of civic participation.
We need time for civic participation.
Yes. And general political, social morale, generally. And but this is sort of lacking in our society. We've become, I think, so cynical and self-centered that such ideals where people take seriously their social and political obligations, including taxes, seems very far out of reach at present.
Yeah. I mean, there are many, many people in this country who spend many unpaid hours at the local levels, including what you see on UP television, participating in boards of various kinds, including the board that governs UPTV and governs the various aspects of government in Urbana and Champaign County. So it isn't that there's any, I mean, these people may tend to be people who have who do have a little more time, and I just think it should be a little more widespread that people have time to and access to that this might cause us to think a little bit differently about how government operates at various levels. The liberal mentality since World War II has been centralized government, and that many, many things about the liberal mentality as it's been passed on to us from the New Deal onwards probably need to be rethought in various ways.
Well, there's been a big shift from the idea of individual responsibility that we get from Jeffersonian notions of democracy to the idea of pressure groups. And you're nothing as an individual unless you're a member of some large and powerful group which has a lot of money and can hire lobbyists and so on.
One point that you referred to, Ryan, yes, Ron. It was actually Ryan that I wanted to talk about. Ryan's budget, Congressman Ryan's budget. I think it's important to look at Congressman Ryan's budget in the context of American politics right now, not in isolation, because the major thing Ryan's budget does, is establish Mr. Obama again as the lesser evil. Yeah. This has been Ryan's job for a while now, and by promoting a budget which, as you properly described it, is outrageously punitive for most Americans, it allows Obama to step forward and say, look, I'm not quite so bad. I am, by the way, you remember my first name, lesser evil. And the lesser evil includes cutting programs of Social Security and Medicare, which has been the goal of the Obama administration from early on. And now they're able to do it on the grounds of saying, well, at least I'm not as bad as Mr. Ryan. My budget cuts Social Security, my eventual budget will cut Social Security and Medicare, but not so badly. This is the stalking horse in this sense is the major task. Ryan is more than just a part of a horse. He's the whole horse. Image is getting out of hand there. I'm sorry.
I would have thought of him as some other part of the horse's anatomy.
Exactly. That's what I was working for.
Okay.
But he has a job to do, and he's getting more than minimum wage for it too. You're watching News from Neptune. We'll go to David Green.
Yes, the question for the last week among the Cardinals has been, who's on first? Apparently the Chinese say she's on first.
Yes, exactly. Who being gone.
Yes, right, who being gone, and now she's on first. And I'm glad that I won't be, when I look at my Yahoo homepage and see the word Cardinals and it's in the middle of spring training,
yes.
I had just gotten to the point of being able to kind of not think baseball whenever I saw the word Cardinals. But now I can go back
to it.
I can go back to that. But that is not my topic. My topic is actually returning to a theme I addressed 2 or 3 weeks ago about the analogies between the Israeli and American governments, governing powers. And that was provoked again this week and in the last couple of days as a coalition government was formed by Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel with the various parties, the various what are referred to as centrist parties that managed to gain many seats in the last Israeli parliamentary elections a month or so ago. One of the most fascinating things I've read this week, believe it or not, is in a New York Times article in which they refer to one of the parties that has been excluded from this governing coalition that has just been formed. That party is the Shas party, which represents people in Israel who are referred to as ultra-Orthodox Jews. And what it said in this New York Times article, in quoting the leader of this party, a man named Aryeh Deir, is that in excluding this party from the governing coalition, they were excluding the have-nots. That is, the have-nots among Israeli Jews. Well, who is it that the ultra-Orthodox Shas party represents in Israel? They are religious Jews, but they also tend to be, from what I understand, and maybe I haven't kept up with this quite as much as I should, but they represent not necessarily the radical settlers or the Orthodox settlers, but they represent the Sephardic Jews, the ultra-Orthodox Sephardic Jews, who were latecomers to the Zionist project and tended to form from the very start, from the early 1950s, when they emigrated to Israel from various Arab and North African, Middle Eastern and North African countries represented what David Ben-Gurion called the human material of the Zionist project. And I find this, I'm focusing on this sort of little sliver of reality here. But the point I want to make is that what does it mean, whether in Israel or in this country, where we have centrist governments, whether Netanyahu or Obama, about to make his first trip to Israel to, as sounds like a kind of photo opportunity journey or a very politicized journey. It doesn't sound productive in relation to anything, certainly not the so-called peace process. But in any event, what interests me about this is the idea that what is called centrism and what is the function of these coalition governments, whether in Israel or the, in effect, coalition government we have in this country between the Democratic administration and the Republican Congress, or at least the Republican House, serves a very neoliberal purpose. It has tended to put, in spite of all the concern about foreign policy, whether the U.S. presence in the Middle East in general or Israeli presence in Palestine, it tends to put those issues on the back burner and tends to promote itself as promoting the middle class, the concerns of the middle class, and certainly marginalizing the concerns of the poor. But in doing this, very much promoting the neoliberal project, meaning that that we will have business as usual. We will attempt to kind of shore up people that have enough power, people with a little bit of money who have enough power, whose needs need to be served. But whether it's whoever the Shas party represents in Israel or the minority groups in this country, the people, the third of the people that live under fairly dire circumstances in this country, they really are not represented in these governments that are tending towards austerity and towards cutting back on social programs. So that's just something I want to put out today for response.
Comment, Ron?
That political situation within Israel is too complex for me to deal with. I'm afraid I just don't know enough about it to have any intelligent comment. But the general rightward movement over the past decade or so has been disturbing to me, whether these people are called centrists or not. But what is obscure to me anyway. But I think there are some very dangerous people operating in Israel now, among Likud and the West Bank settlers and so on. They're making it impossible for there to be a reasonable two-state solution to the problem there. And I have only dark thoughts about the whole situation and nothing really more intelligent to say, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I mean, I think what your point, but still what you're pointing out is what's fascinating to me when we really begin to sort of break down some of these stereotypical definitions of what it means to be left, right, or center.
Yeah.
And the role of both neoliberalism and religion, religious fundamentalism or religious orthodoxy, and the way it's cast in those contexts. And I think, again, this applies both to the way Christian fundamentalism is viewed by liberals in our own country, in the political context, and in Israel, the way at least the ultra-Orthodox parties are viewed in the Israeli context, which I think are very different than the way that the religious settlers, the particular strain of religious fundamentalism that contributes and partly now fuels the settler movement. Not that the settler movement is fueled just by that. I think the settler movement has always been fueled by very secular, by the secular interests of the Israeli government. So, I mean, these are very complicated issues, and I would only pretend to have perhaps a slight, I mean, given your modesty, I would claim to have maybe a little better understanding of it, but no way thorough, but sort of enough from even what I read in the New York Times to provoke me to think that there have to be different ways if we're to break out of this a sort of standard liberal way of viewing the world and challenge the neoliberal movement, that there has to be different ways of viewing religion and poverty and fundamentalism and what liberalism actually is or maybe could be. And these are complex issues. I think, I mean, obviously I feel like people like Noam Chomsky begin to penetrate some of these things. But even I mean, one of my few minor complaints with Noam Chomsky is that on the one hand he'll emphasize the fundamentalism and fanaticism of our own country in Christian terms. And he'll do the same thing in the Muslim world in context of Saudi Arabia and in Israel in terms of the religious fanaticism there. He has some sympathy towards the economic grievances of those lower classes that are religious, but I don't see him quite playing those things out in the way he analyzes the whole thing. So I know that's a big thing to chew off, Carl. I'm sure you're chomping at the bit here, but
No, I'm yeah. Thinking that Chomsky has had some of the most interesting things to say about the Tea Party as a movement. While good liberals in this country were busily excoriating the Tea Party as being the worst thing that could happen in American politics, he's pointing out the very real grievances that motivate it, and ask why are these people being organized by the right rather than by the left? Why isn't the left doing the job of organizing these people around these grievances? And that remains, it seems to me, a very good question that he's been posing for a while. But I'd like to go back to the question of coalition government in Israel and suggest here we're looking at something that indicates the primitive nature of American politics, particularly. I'd compare the efforts that the ruling groups, the ruling class in Israel, had to go in order to produce this coalition to what's going on in Italy right now, where a similar effort to produce a coalition after an election is coming out. Some of my correspondents are referring to all those crazy Italians, who don't know how to do politics. That's why they're having troubles over a coalition. Well, it was sort of like that's similar to saying those crazy Europeans, who don't know how to keep their finances in order, and that's the reason they're having problems about that. In each case, I think it's a failure to recognize what the politics actually are, that these coalition movements represent a real problem for ruling groups in a modern polity. Or in a 20th century, perhaps, maybe we should say, a polity of coalition politics. The United States, after all, has an 18th century polity, an 18th century government put together in the Constitution of 1787, rather, which was designed as its chief architect, James Madison, pointed out, to protect the minority of the opulent, the rich, against the majority. That's what the Constitution was to do, and on the whole, it's done pretty well since 1787 in doing that job. Now, Britain, in contrast, has a 19th century Constitution. During Tony Blair's connivance with George Bush in attacking Iraq, there was an impeachment motion brought forward in the Parliament against Blair, which is an old-fashioned remedy. It exists in the British Constitution, but had fallen into disuse, whereas since it was enshrined in the American Constitution, in the 18th century government, we still have it. So they couldn't do it in the 19th century government because what takes the place of impeachment is a government falling when it loses its majority in the 19th century. That doesn't happen in the American context with its old-fashioned government. leap forward to the 20th century and look at the sort of coalition government with proportional representation, which the principal governments of the capitalist states of Europe established after the Second World War because of popular demand. And Israel is built on that pattern, and therefore they have to find a way to go around to form a coalition, a real coalition with an electoral base. Mr. Obama doesn't have that problem. They can stage their stage show from last year, and he's president, and there's no problem about that. And the congressmen and senators who hold their seats on a first-past-the-post basis, they're perfectly comfortable too. They don't have to worry about making coalitions. The result is a way of protecting the minority, the opulent in the United States, that is less democratic than either Italy or Israel. And it's instructive, it seems to me, to the lengths to which the elites in Italy and Israel have to go in order to produce governments that do that. We don't have that problem.
Yeah.
But still, Israel has managed to produce a government that excludes the poor.
Yeah, exactly.
And
it took them more effort than it takes us.
The left, it excludes the leftist parties, which include Palestinians and including even a communist party, and it excludes the far, what it considers the far right, which, as the New York Times said this morning, excluded, the leader of the Shas party put it very much in terms of excluding the have-nots, that is who he feels his party represents. So, the question again, and I raised this a few weeks ago when I raised this issue, is, in spite of having a parliamentary system in which parties can come and go in the way that we can't even dream of in this country, the interests of the neoliberal interests in Israel continue to be served.
Oh, yes.
And so what's the parliamentary system doing to challenge that? There's more than a technical issue here about elections and governments and forms of government.
Does a parliamentary system with the necessity of coalition building really exercise any restraint on external aggression by these countries? It seems to. But
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
In other words, the ruling class has to act differently in these situations, because in these countries, a century of ruling class victories have to be, of working class victories have to be accounted for. David, would you compare Shas with the Tea Party? I know they're different; they have different histories, but in terms of the interests represented and the people represented, the Shas, mutatis mutandis, any connection?
Yeah, I don't. It's kind of hard to say off the top of my head. I mean, these parties didn't come to the fore in Israel until Begin came to power in '77, and I just don't know enough about the history of that party. But I am curious to know what their relationship is to the settler movement. The sense I get is that it's not identified with the settler movement, or maybe more than I think it is. I'd have to kind of do a little research on that. It's just, politics can be very complicated. But I hear what you're saying, and it's like in Israel, it's true that the middle class is the party represented by Lapid is the sort of the middle class. It's representing those people that are feeling somewhat threatened by increasing economic inequality, but and so they have a voice maybe in a way that some Democrats in this country would like to have a voice.
Yeah.
But still, it's a parliamentary system that cannot represent, until the majority of people are desperate. It will not represent them. Maybe when the majority of people really are desperate and recognize what's at stake, the system will be easier for them to govern themselves. Where in our system, the structural obstacles to the vast majority of people governing themselves are really clear.
I've said for a while that one of the reforms that American political structure needs is proportional representation in the Congress, in the House, and that could be accomplished on the state level. That when you went to vote for Congress, instead of voting in an election for a Congressperson from this district, you would go into the voting booth and select a party. The Republicans, the Democrats, the Greens, the Libertarians, the Prohibition Party, whatever you like. You cast your vote for a party, and then the seats, say there are 20, there aren't, but say there are 20 congressional seats in Illinois, they would be allocated according to the proportion of the vote each of the parties got. That is, the Democrats would get 40% of the seats, the Republicans 30%, the Greens 10%, so forth. That would give you 2 Green Congresspeople from Illinois, which seems to me to be a step in the right direction. You're watching News from Neptune. We've come now to the end of the program where we encounter Coburn's Corner. The corner has an edge, indeed a sharp edge. The last writing from the late journalist Alexander Coburn was a pamphlet called Guillotined, in which Coburn nominated cliches, overused phrases, and tedious words for elimination. We want to carry on his great work by adding our own suspects to the kill list, which is a lot less lethal than Barack Obama's kill list. You got somebody for the kill list tonight, Ron?
Yes. The word is provocation, which
How
is being
provoking
used.
of you.
Yeah, being used heavily to describe whatever North Korea is doing. There are always provocations, but the U.S. in conjunction with South Korea is conducting military exercises on the border of North Korea, but those are never called provocations.
Provocations.
Isn't that curious?
Ah, how provoking.
Yeah.
Thank you. David, you got a word for us for the week?
I didn't do my homework this week, so I'm going to have to pass.
Okay.
You'll find online in the dictionary there a little essay on provocation as it's used in the law to justify killing. If you claim that you were sufficiently provoked, and you can get a court to accept that, but it can reduce a murder charge to an involuntary manslaughter charge because you can claim that you were provoked, and this is coming up again and again now. People who say that they felt unsafe or they felt threatened or whatever, so I pulled out my gun and blasted them.
It's an interesting example because it seems to me that there's a great unreported story this week, and that is what's really been several nights of rioting in Brooklyn, occasioned by a provocation. Apparently, the cops blew away a kid in Brooklyn. They pulled out their guns and shot him to death. They claimed that he was going for a gun, that they were provoked, so to speak. They actually, I think they've not used the word in that account, but the result has been really quite serious. I mean, they have new language for it too, which is my nominee for the week. The police in Brooklyn have established a freeze zone. This is not out of the latest Batman movie. This is essentially martial law. In 20-block area of Brooklyn, and that's I don't know if you've seen many reports on the TV or newspaper about a week's worth of rioting in Brooklyn. In any case, they've created some language as well, language that perhaps should be marched off to the guillotine as the cops march the protesters off to jail and beat them up in Brooklyn. I've been following this through Twitter and the British press, remarkably enough, which is covering it, or at least elements of the British press are covering it. And so it seems to me that if we were to take in the history of the Obama administration's attacks on the Occupy movement across the country and their coordination with local police forces, and put that in relationship to what the New York cops apparently seem to be willing to do without provocation from the administration, we have a situation that really is quite serious and is not, I think, easy to disinter from the general war policy of this last decade. The war in the Middle East that the U.S. is responsible for is coming home and is appearing on the streets. And I think that's that's one of the things that's going on in Brooklyn as the police are given more and more leeway to respond to provocations. So the situation, the news from Brooklyn is very bad. You've been watching News from Neptune for the 11th week of 2013. Our program is named in honor of Noam Chomsky. And this has been the Ides of March edition, so do beware. If our program interested you, you might want to look for similar programs here on Urbana Public Television, now not only on cable, but streaming online at urbanapublictelevision.org. Notably, Democracy Now!, 7 a.m. On weekdays, and the Tom Hartman Show, The Big Picture, weekdays at 8 a.m. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight on News from Neptune have been David Green and Ron Szoke. This and other editions of the program can be seen on the website newsfromneptune.com and on Facebook. I can be reached at carl@newsfromneptune.com and on Facebook, and I'm happy to receive your comments. Our thanks to UPTV, especially Jake, Jason, and Caleb. Inshallah, we'll be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge. Meanwhile, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.